Hello, good morning, everyone, and also good afternoon for the ones out of India joining us today. My name is Henning Lange. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO here at Giant Swarm. And today I'm very pleased to introduce you to one of my co-founders. It's Oliver, and he will talk today around Cloud Native Predictions 2022. And he has been doing it for quite a while. And obviously, we are always reviewing how our prediction have been going. And then we are also looking forward to have a real discussion with you, answer your questions, your thoughts around Cloud Native in this year. And right now, I'm more than pleased to hand over to Oliver.
Perfect. Thanks, Henning. Wonderful. Good day, everybody. Very nice to see. And I see first people are joining the chat. So you can open up the chat and then gladly ask questions. Henning will monitor, I will monitor. Just ask questions at any time because, I mean, we want to have a conversation in the end and talk to you. So really looking forward to that one. So me, Oliver Tillman, one of the co-founders, as Henning just said, I'm responsible for the customers at Giant Swarm. Hence, I'm talking to all our customers and to a lot of real users of Kubernetes and really have taken the last few years to kind of clear my mind and figure out what my thoughts are for the next year. And this was one of those years. So with slight pressure by other people inside Giant Swarm, I have done another Cloud Native prediction. At the end of the year, there's a blog post out, which you could also read, but I'll go over the different steps today. So in general, before we go forward, it's like we all know what the current state is. So we all entered fully pumped to 2022, and now we're entering 2022. And it's like a bit more mellow. I actually didn't do a prediction in 2021, pretty much for that reason, but I felt it's about time. And in all honesty, we're pretty pumped. So really, that's me, by the way. That picture will follow you through. As you see, I have amazingly good choice in glass styles. And I was really looking at the future and building stuff all my life. And so I took my crystal ball out and am trying to see what's next. First off, yes, consistent, Simon. Very consistent, at least. So let's first go 2019, 2020 and really look at my old predictions and figure out how they worked out. So back then, I said that the Pivotal platform will die and VMware will really focus on native Kubernetes. We all know Kubernetes is a real deal inside VMware, and if you really look closer, this is actually really the case. Of course, you know, Pivotal isn't delisted as such, but it's really that they're now focusing on Tanzu, and I give myself 100 points. You know, that was correct, and that's the general trend that we're seeing, that everybody is focusing on that one. There will be at least 2 major acquisitions. Well, there were theoretically. There were major acquisitions in hundreds of millions, mostly around storage though, like Pure Storage by Portworx, Pure Storage bought Portworx, and you had PortShift was bought by Cisco. SUSE bought Rancher. That was an interesting one to see, that Rancher found a seemingly good home and have developing nicely. And there were other acquisitions. So it's really nice to see lots of stuff in the security space also. And Microsoft actually bought Kinfolk, one of our close friends and long-time partners in this cloud native path. So yes, there were several acquisitions, and that will likely continue. Red Hat will announce a fully Kubernetes compatible OpenShift. For those longer in the space, OpenShift is to a certain extent Kubernetes, but there are some small differences. And this one is not really that clear. But the thing is, they took over Locomotive, the Kubernetes variant from the Kinvolk folks, and in the end, they develop in that direction, and we do see them also working on Cluster API. Them working on Cluster API kind of means that they're going down more and more the standard route, which we're really welcoming and really like seeing. So that's, again, not 100%, but it's going that direction. And it shows, again, the overarching thing in our mind that Kubernetes is really becoming the cloud standard, the cloud native standard. And we'll see how far it goes and if it becomes the general access to the cloud for most people in the coming years, where the cloud providers will be more a base layer with additional services for special things. So how did my predictions fare for Giant Swarm? We will continue to be patient. That was a heading I chose deliberately because it might feel weird for a startup to be patient. But as I might need to explain, like the founding team of Giant Swarm has worked together for, I don't know, 15, 17 years. So I worked with Henning since 2002. So we've been doing this for some time. And we did several startups. We invested in startups and whatnot. And what I mean more with patient is consistency. We really believe in certain things, and we were really making sure we're not following a hype train. And we really believe that for most companies out there, running their own Kubernetes is not something they should be doing. Like people, as Kelsey Hightower once said, shouldn't be running their own AWS. You know, there are things out there that should work differently. And that's really what I mean with patient. We have the general vision that we're following, that we believe there's a cloud native stack that needs to run for companies who need to focus on their ability to innovate. And for that, somebody needs to care for that base layer. And it has shown to be true that that's the exact right path we've chosen, and we haven't really changed that and been patient on that path, even though, especially in the pandemic, that was partly hard in terms of companies not taking a huge leap. But the good thing is we have really long-term customers that have all grown leaps and bounds, and added a lot of customers still in the last year, which is really nice to see that the idea we have is the right thing. We will grow beyond Kubernetes. That's also something we said theoretically from the beginning, that it will never be only about Kubernetes. But by now it becomes clearer. If you go to giantswarm.io/about, you will further down see the teams that we have. And we structured the teams around different stacks by now. So you have obviously Kubernetes in there, but we have lots of different teams now that do stuff for our customers, future and current. That might be the connectivity team that is running Nginx and Linkerd and Kong as an API gateway for different customers. We have a security team that is making sure we have an open source security solution, only build up of open source tools that we can give to customers that they can really use to make sure they're fully secure and compliant. We have monitoring, we have lots of different things, and there are more teams being built up as we see customers needing that. And the last 18 months have really shown that growing, with customers relying on us on a lot more different parts, be it GitOps, be it others, and us really continuing to focus on the open source part, where we can really build a product around open source to manage systems. We will grow 50% to 100% in multiple fronts. Well, in relation to 2019, probably, but thanks to COVID, not really. Like most people know, this was a fluctuative time, but this really didn't grow that much, at least not in terms of people and similar, and it just didn't make sense at the time. And we again went patient and consistent and made sure we grow when we need to go and don't when we don't. And that was a time when we needed to relax a bit. So that brings us to 2022, though, and I need to get a sip of coffee. So cloud predictions 2022. I obviously asked the team, so we talked to colleagues, listened a bit to customers, and thought about what are the things we can say that are where I have a chance of failing. Because I mean, I need to do predictions that might not become true. So it's all around people, GitOps, the edge, security, and so on and so forth. So what are the different parts? First of all, security will be a key ingredient on the supply chain side. We, to a certain extent, see that with the acquisitions, that security is still a key thing. But what we have seen with customers is that it becomes more important the more mature you become, because you give more power to the teams, and the entire software supply chain that is really there, where you go from idea until having something run as code in your servers, really is different than it was previously. You have a lot of moving parts, and you have a lot of automation, and you need to be sure and make sure that you have that automation built up to really know what is in your clusters. And that has worked for now, and that will probably still work. But with things like Log4j last year, where companies suddenly needed to find out where all the Log4j's instances are, and other things, really people understand that this supply chain part is important. There's even a new company, ChainGuard, that has been founded by core Kubernetes people to really address that subject. But it's really going that direction to figure out which CVEs are important, which CVEs are not, what do I need to fix, what do I not need to fix, what do I need to react on, how fast can I react on it, how can I make sure every team knows. And it's interesting again, because we always say that this you're doing Kubernetes because you want to increase your innovation speed to a certain extent. And that also means your software development speed. And that also means that you need to rely on communication. And that is all about communication. A large part of that security thing, which we're noticing in building with customers together, that security platform, is really how do you communicate to teams? How do you allow teams to do what? Can they deploy something even if a CVE that you theoretically want fixed needs to like is still in there because there's a big release coming and they need to push a feature out? Who is responsible for the base layer? What about shared code between them? What about libraries? What about things that aren't really critical? So there's lots of questions that need to be answered there, and lots of them are just communication to a certain extent.
Ollie, maybe let me interrupt you quickly on the security. Like talking to many of our customers and other enterprises, what I recently noticed, I mean, obviously often, as you said, DevOps teams are jumping towards Kubernetes to speed up their development. And so security often takes a lot of time to get involved with and to build it up. And if you think about having multiple DevOps teams in different business areas in a big company. So what's the best path forward to get them aligned on security? Is it building up a central platform team? How do you see that?
What we at least see in the customer, or what I see in the customers at the moment, is that with a certain size, you need an internal platform team that handles a lot of the communications and best practices and trainings and so on and so forth. And we see the same thing. What we actually see is that there's a cross-functional security team being built up in these companies. So cloud native security team, call it if you want to, in the sense that what we have there is at the moment we have the core platform team that knows how to add stuff to the automation. We have security people that just know what the internal rules are and what the checks and balances are that need to be there. We have people from an implementation team that just make sure this is communicated and made available across teams. And that team will continuously need to iterate, because we always see, like, once you have a problem on the implementation side, that a certain team isn't really using things and you need to be harsher there, or you have certain rules on the security side that just don't make sense anymore, and the core platform team that is responsible for Kubernetes as such, and many of the applications need to say that it doesn't make sense. So you really need all those people at the table with the right responsibilities to be able to make decisions, and that's what we're seeing what works. If you only have one of them, it doesn't. So you need a cross-functional team across security, implementation, platform, and so on and so forth. Next, the edge. More and more companies will move Kubernetes to the edge. Okay, we said that all for ages. You know, I mean, the edge is a subject, what, 3-4 years, whatnot. I think it's to a certain extent still more complicated, but we're seeing it a lot more. And with the edge, I mean lots of different things. So what we're seeing is factories or shops, and some of the shops, one of our customers is Adidas, and if you've ever been into one of their flagship store in London, you will understand that there's technology present in the shop, and a lot of it. And you have lots of other things in there, and you have train stations and trains, and you have many different locations of different sizes. And in the end, many of the companies running complex systems have learned that working with Kubernetes is the right way, and they would like to work the same way on the edge. So the question becomes, how can you do that? We do believe that Cluster API will help. So we have a lot of investment in Cluster API in general. And I think 5 of the top 100 committers for Cluster API are Giant Swarm, which for a 60-person startup with other people being in there, being VMware and Google and Red Hat, is fine enough. Through that standard, we will be able to layer things and have different solutions on different levels. It'll be interesting to see what is really needed on those different levels, especially with old Java and whatever code that needs lots of space and so on and so forth. How does it get there? What kind of network connections do we have? So there's still lots of things to answer for smaller things like a train or a tiny store around the corner. Factory is another thing. Many factories have racks and racks of space, and then the question really becomes: is that edge or is that just an on-premise network? But all that will see changes this year, we presume, or at least we see in the talks with customers.
Let me give you another question there, because obviously also in chats around a lot of edge use cases, and you're right. I mean, like, we have seen that upcoming last year more and more. I still remember having with one big telco a first discussion on edge like 6-7 years ago, roughly, when we started Giant Swarm, when it was about deploying software on all their mobile towers. So I think there's some trend towards that as well. But my question here is more around there's different type of edge use cases and sizes, especially when it comes to IT infrastructure available in the edge. And how do you think about having kind of a management cluster and have an isolated running edge location versus having whatever a central management cluster managing somehow like smaller workload clusters on hundreds, thousands of devices? And where do you think is this going? And does it require different type of technology or solutions?
Well, we have one thing that our management clusters kind of tend to need to be near the workload clusters because we use them to manage everything on those workload clusters. And if they're too far away, it creates a problem. And if you have an edge case where you have a tiny store, you want that thing to work even if the network goes down. So you want your monitoring right next to the workloads, because if the network goes down, you don't want to stop having monitoring data or something. And it really depends. As mentioned, I think also to the people we talk to, many of the first edge use cases are a rack, half a rack, 2 racks. You have space there. That's not the tiny space. We have also talked, for example, together with HP, how small we can get things. HPE, no, it's HP and HPE. I think we talked to HPE. I don't like.
Yes, we do.
Complicated. With all these big companies. And the thing is that like you theoretically can get like 4 servers, 6 servers in a little like 2U case and whatnot. So there is a way to get a very small system, but that's where we're looking also at, can you get, like, if you look at the control plane more as this is where we control clusters, and then maybe it's actually on the same machines, and then you only need 3, 4, 5, then it's doable. We think we need the control plane right next to it as a definition of making sure it's logging and monitoring and doing stuff and controlling the cluster and being there to bootstrap a new one. But there will obviously be other solutions too. I doubt that everything runs on a mobile phone tower, but there's really the question, like, how small does it get? You know, how tiny is edge? For now, next thing, edge, let's say half a rack, 2 racks, that'll come. There will be first solutions for smaller installations, but that's still some time to come. Also, because I remember recently had a conversation with a telco person about like the systems in the switching stations, and to a certain extent it's 3 servers or 2 servers, and they're exactly the same, and they're just chugging along, not being changed for ages, and if one breaks, the second takes over. If you suddenly want to do that with Kubernetes, you want 2 installations, so at least 7 servers or something, you know, suddenly, like the question is, does that really make sense if you're getting small? Like, I do like Kubernetes and I think it's valid for a lot of cases, but maybe not every car needs a full Kubernetes cluster with redundant servers and so on and so forth. But we'll see. Lots of tiny Raspberry Pi systems. I mean, the big thing in cars is probably the graphic card, so that's another question. Let's really look at the use case where it makes sense. I'll wait on questions for every slide now. By the way, people, you can gladly also ask questions. Don't leave it all to Henning. Move towards value-added services. That's a trend I've seen with some conversations with customers around different clouds. And that's interesting. Because there's from Felipe. Don't you think we are lacking of services containerized to be deployed at the edge? Yeah, I think that's like many of the real edge things need custom software, and then the question becomes like, who builds that software, and can they build that software ready for clusters? That's exactly what I mean. Like, talk to a factory person, and the thing is that their factory software is years and years old. It's not ready to run in Kubernetes. But in general, it could, and there would be enough space there. The cashier thing on the iPad runs fine on the iPad. You don't need a big server behind that. And what do you all need on top? And I agree with you. You can deploy Kubernetes anywhere and 3 little nodes. But the question is, what problem does it solve? And is the application ready? Or is it like, okay, we've done this for 20 years. It's a Java app. It needs 24 gigs of RAM. I don't know what. And now we need like Kubernetes and monitoring and logging, and we need 5 32 gig servers with 8 cores to run our caching app. That just doesn't make sense. And we recently had the discussion. We upgraded theoretically. We try to be on the latest version of the operating system, and in recent times, C Group version 1 was replaced with C Group version 2. So that was clear for a long time, and now it's C Group version 2. Can't really do that because most of our customers run a lot of applications running on Java 8 and 11 because that's the latest long-term stable releases. The newest long-term stable is 17. That's from September 2021. That's just too new. So I don't even want to know what's running on the edge and like controlling factories and things, where the time of innovation is just totally different. I remember 20 years ago or something, I did a consultancy project with a big chemical company about like technology. And when I was done with my presentation, they asked, but how will that market look in 30 years? And you just figured, damn, they're building chemical factories. Like 30 years is nothing. And in our case, it's like, the market is a year old. So, and that's also with these factories. They start building and then they start building software that it's not built yet to constantly change. The interesting part is then again also how big does 5G change things in terms of backend connectivity? Does the factory even need to have stuff in there, or is 5G fast enough, and can we have it somewhere else? And will then perfect lead over the value-added services being in the cloud provider. What I mean with value-added services, we all know, like we had cloud providers provided Amazon, like Amazon had S3 as the first thing. So it started out with just storage, and then servers came, and then a load balancer came, and so on and so forth. By now there's more stuff. And the trend I'm seeing currently is that some of the cloud providers are actually adding services that are more than a tool. So more than, here is your MySQL service, here is your Postgres service, here is your Kafka service, and so on and so forth. They're adding here is your product catalog service that will have a product feed for search engines, integrate with advertising systems, and automatically optimize for user cookie data. I don't know what. Which for a lot of companies is great. And you just see it merging slowly, like it's all, the differences are becoming more difficult to discern. So you have a Shopify that has a great simple to build shop that is starting to tinker in having also warehouses and doing the entire side of shipment. And then you have the Hut Group that is running huge stores for really big companies with all the backend systems. And then you have there are API-driven store systems, but then you also start having the cloud providers who slowly encroach like parts of that and say we can run your store or certain parts of your store, where companies are tempted to outsource. And that will be very interesting because at the same time, I'm talking to companies that are seeing, okay, we need to build up a data center again because these cloud providers are too damn fucking expensive. Like this doesn't work anymore. Like we need to do something else. So it'll be interesting where that goes. It makes it very simple because getting developers is hard. So it's a clear trend I see. And we will see more of that. At the same time, especially the big ones will try to be attractive for developers and build their own stuff and try to not have a lock-in, and figure out that if online is a large part of their business, then it's a competitive advantage, and then they need to figure out where's the innovation that they want to do and which kind of services they can use that will not hinder their innovation. That's really that's really where we're having interesting discussions. We see both companies going back to using more and more services, and we see them developing more of their own stuff based on open source. It's like two directions at the same time. It's a bit weird, but we'll see where it goes. I go to the next one. I talked about CAPI quickly. So consensus on standard like CAPI will gain traction. So we've been following CAPI for some time. So for those that don't know, Cluster API is the API standard that the Kubernetes community is agreeing on to manage clusters. Historically, Giant Swarm has been built to manage clusters. Our customers get a full service. We had a customer recently again being approached by a cloud provider saying, "Why don't you use our Kubernetes? It's the best Kubernetes out there." And that customer just said, "Kubernetes is not any of my concern. That's like Giant Swarm is taking care. I have Kubernetes. It's not something where better or worse happens. I have a standard-based Kubernetes, and that always runs and is taken care of." And that's what we're there for. The product we have, which is the only reason we can do that at the scale that we do it at, is a product that we use to do that. So we have built our own operator over the years to manage Kubernetes. Back when we started, CoreOS back then, the predecessor to Kinfolk, CoreOS kind of, the predecessor to Kinfolk is wrong. Like Kinfolk took over the operating system. So the CoreOS people brought out the operator concept for Kubernetes, which is really around the time we started really thinking about it, and we figured that running Kubernetes with Kubernetes makes sense. Because we're telling our customers like Kubernetes is the hot new shit you need to use. We can't then tell them and we're managing it with Ansible. That makes no sense. And we really said like all the operator concept that we have reconciliation and really something that keeps Kubernetes how it looks, and we have really fixed versions and so on and so on, always makes sense. And there just wasn't something like that. So we needed to build it ourselves. But we have been monitoring the Cluster API team for some time. I've been part of the discussions. And in the last year, it went to a stage where we said, okay, now it's time to possibly switch over. We always want to stand on the shoulders of giants. We want to use open source where possible. Hence, we started going deeper into the Cluster API meetings, starting to commit a lot of our existing code into the upstream projects to really figure out what is still needed, and are currently moving all our operators over to Cluster API. And we see that happening more and more. So we focused on clusters first, and we had an API to do that, and then we built Cluster API, and now everybody slowly starts agreeing. It's interesting to see which cloud providers have a full Cluster API interface and for what. We presume they all will have down the line, but for now they don't. It's not everybody having that Cluster API interface because they become a more or less replaceable thing. It makes it a lot easier and interesting for us to have a support for all the providers that exist out there and be able to manage all of them, which makes it interesting for us, interesting for our customers, interesting for the community, but to a certain extent makes the cloud people more replaceable as a backend. That is something you will see more and more. Tanzu from VMware, in the end, is just using Cluster API. And Antos from Google uses Cluster API to run on other cloud providers. They just don't on Google because that doesn't really have a public Cluster API interface yet, which is interesting because it's Google who started with Kubernetes, but that's for another discussion and they'll come over eventually. I don't think that will, they can't hold back for long. So Cluster API will be the clear trend we will all be seeing. GitOps will be the new king in town, and we see that left and right. It's really fun. So by now, it's every giant swarm management cluster automatically gets an Argo CD and a Flux instance. Argo CD is mostly for us. Flux is for the customers. And then our app catalog has Flux, and they can automatically put Flux in all the workload clusters, which really means they can bootstrap the entire thing with GitOps. And that automation is just really starting to make sense. And the tools are slowly there and the understanding is there. It's interesting from a management perspective because we obviously need to have, to a certain extent, shared repositories with our customers because we need to share state and understand what the current, what is the current state of the cluster. We can't just go in and fix something and then the GitOps stuff will just reconcile everything back to the old state. But we never really did that anyway. We always rolled out new versions. We have, patches, whatever, that we automatically roll out. So all the customers are on the latest stage. So it really fits to our general idea of working. And it'll really be interesting to see where we are at end of the year with templates and services around that and what kind of players are in the space and what our customers have learned. We have monthly customer meetups in the evening, which is like once a month starting at 8, sometimes ending at 2 in the morning. Mostly around conversations about learning things from each other. And there you already see that whenever the subject comes on, people are interested and talk to each other and really try to figure out what who uses and what the pitfalls are and where they need to move and how they can enable teams and so on and so forth. So that's really cool to know. Giant Swarm will end 2022 with 100 people. 100 just sounds like such a great number. But as we're 60 and looking for 25 or something at the moment, doesn't feel like the harshest prediction out there and the most thrilling one. It'll still be a stretch, and at the same time, I hope it's not a lot more than 100 people, which again might sound weird for startup people, but I just think it's hard for culture to more than double. So we'll see. That is, by the way, from our last on-site in Croatia. We actually met end of last year for the first time since beginning of 2020. Yeah, long time ago. So it was really nice seeing everybody. And yeah, we'll see that we end the year very well. Which leads us to questions. Anybody have any further questions for these wonderful and always correct predictions?
In the meantime, yeah, just type it in the chat. We will keep an eye on it. Ollie, if you think about all the predictions here have been made, so what is the one where you think that's the biggest stretch for you? Because what I understood is they are kind of very reasonable also from my perspective, but where you think it's the biggest stretch you made?
I think the biggest, I admit there isn't a huge stretch in there. There are things that are unclear where I don't have a clear measuring point. As we said previously, and we discussed a bit based on Philippe's question, the edge thing is just a bit unclear because the edge is so many things. Like for some people, it's like the edge is anything that is not AWS, and then yeah, we'll have edge. The question is, how deep do we go? And I think the biggest impact and the biggest thing where I'm still not 100% sure, which I might have to put in another prediction, which I didn't, is like that gel between value-added services and standards and so on and so forth. I really don't know if we're doing ourselves a favor with all the non-open source, very tight managed services that are nice, but that are just a pure lock-in and that move innovation to the cloud provider, which long-term I'm very afraid of. And at the same time, will we be able to put that copy standard through? Maybe I should have if I could have done a prediction for 2025, I'd have said that copy to a certain extent is the de facto interface to start clusters within a GitOps level approach. And I'd hope we don't have too many value-added services that are beyond open source tools that you build upon. That would be really nice, but it won't happen this year. It's not a standard yet. For that it's too new, but I really hope it'll be a standard in something like 3 years, especially because what will be interesting if an HP and other infrastructure build companies can manage to build an infrastructure that has a copy interface, be it because it's VMware or OpenStack or whatnot, or because it's something else, but an infrastructure with a great copy interface so that companies can put something anywhere, on-premise, whatnot, in remote locations where you can talk, copy, launch clusters, and do stuff. That will be very powerful down the line. But it's not 2022. That's 2024, 25, because it just takes time. But that's more a dream than a prediction.
Yes, so looking in the chat, so yeah, please come up with your own predictions if you have some, and try to get some feedback from our side, or if you have any questions or topic you would like dive deeper into. When I heard this morning that I might take over the moderation, so I'm just recently thinking on some own predictions for 2022. So I've not shared that with Ollie, but maybe we can do the other way around. So from all the chats and conversations I'm pleased to have with being at customers or other larger organizations around, my feeling is like there's more organizations advance on their journey and thinking about establishing a central platform team. We had that topic when we quickly jumped into the security thoughts, and there's good reasons for it. But on the other hand, there's also lots of article around why central platform teams are failing. So Ollie, how do you see that?
Well, it probably depends on how you set it up. You can fail in any direction. I remember one company where they said like every team is responsible for their own Kubernetes and just we do full DevOps, go. And now 50 teams have 50 different Kubernetes implementations and so on and so forth. That obviously doesn't work. The central platform team dictating what everybody has to do doesn't work either. So I think the thing is, in the end, it's not about the central platform team or not. It's about allowing people to have the flexibility to build the best code possible to solve their problems, and at best with as little effort as possible. And that mostly, in my mind, means a well set up platform team. A well set up platform team that is there to keep flexibility and not, platform team is not there to say, you now have an Excel sheet to ask for your Kubernetes cluster instead of an Excel sheet to ask for a server. Like it needs to be API driven, it needs to be automated, and needs to allow flexibility to teams. Otherwise it doesn't work. But that's also why we often put a lot of effort in talking to companies and making sure they understand that they need to change. Like this is not only about implementing Kubernetes and staying the same. You need to change how you work as a customer, as a company, and that's important to understand. And that's an important part of the entire construct.
And another topic I come to, and that's one of my prediction would be that the talent gap is just getting worse and worse
Yeah.
over the course of the year. So what we are noticing and seeing is like, here in Central Europe, where we are originally from, we see being at large, super highly funded, fast-growing internet startups, all announcing to build up a central platform team of 50 to 100 people. So grabbing all the talents, and at the same time we see enterprises, they also plan to build up a central platform team, but the question is, where will all the people come from that really knows and understand Kubernetes in a very good way? So how do you see that going on, and what's your take on from the customers you're working with on a daily basis?
Well, most of them have a central customer team, but in the sense that we're still there to run Kubernetes. So you still need a central platform team, but it's a lot smaller and a lot more focused on the applications themselves and on the value add of the companies themselves. Because yes, absolutely, I think these people get more scarce, and you need to figure out what you want to do. That's also the problem with the value-added services. If you decide you want to build your own stuff, you need to be attractive for developers, and that's something that is beyond just putting out the position. You need to understand why would a developer work at your company, and what you need to do to get those people. And I think for most companies out there, the central platform team needs enough people to just manage their, how do they deploy things, how do they monitor, how do they train the team, how do they innovate, to not focus on other things. If they wouldn't build, as I mentioned, they wouldn't build their own data center by now with their own servers and their own images on those servers and so on and so forth. So why build your own Kubernetes? Yes, there's a managed Kubernetes by the cloud providers, but there's a lot of stuff to do that. And the question is, where is the abstraction layer? And a good abstraction layer is the Kubernetes API. You have an API to talk to, and everything below that is taken care of. That's the first abstraction layer. Next might be you just have a pipeline and not even a Kubernetes API and just use GitOps. But that might be a bit too much. But that's how we try to think, and how we try to also talk to customers. Like, what do they give their developers? We have customers that say we want to give our developers Kubernetes, but we have a few people or a few teams where we say they just get the GitOps interface. They don't get anything else.
There's one comment from Jan David. I think that plays in your direction. That goes in, an accelerated trend towards decentralization, meaning there's lots of locations, clouds, and general service delivery which will be happen as Kubernetes and Kapi, you talked a lot about, will facilitate that. So I think that's we just can agree on it, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I know Jan David, and I still need to get back to Jan David. I have your message unread in Slack, by the way. So yeah, I agree with Jan. I fully agree with Jan, but he knows that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And it's really that thing that's what I meant. It just needs to get to a stage where they need to be able to deploy something somewhere where they don't need to care. Or in the end, the company needs to say, I need my Kubernetes API in this location, and the giant swarm needs to be able to say, fine, give us 2 days, it'll be there. And we, to a certain extent, don't care either. We don't want to build servers. And I remember in my student home where I studied, I put RAM blocks into motherboards. I don't want to do that again, even though it was fun. So we don't, like, theoretically, we want a little cupboard with a few things in it, and you put power and internet in it, and then it comes up and has a Cluster API interface, and we just deploy stuff and we're done. That's the dream scenario. So at the end, you'll have an edge thing that is as simple as the cloud, because it just takes 2 days because it needs to be shipped by physical post.
So I do have another prediction from my side, going also a little bit what you're just stating. it's like everything will develop more in a real developer self-service platform. Hence, today we are obviously working a lot with central platform teams together. But from my perspective, also like the developer at the end of the day is kind of the end user. And they often are not that happy that they have to go back talking to the platform team, do the coordination. And I think there will be a trend towards enabling that. And that also obviously requires, as a developer, just don't want to think about if he deploys on-prem or in an edge location or on whatever type of public cloud, it should look always the same. So, and I think we will not be done with that by end of the year of 22.
No.
There will be a very strong trend towards that. And it might be a marathon getting there, but that's where we want to be, I guess, right?
Yeah, and can be a trend for next year.
Okay. Put it on the list, or just going out a little bit. So I'm right now. There's no more comment.
We're at 50 minutes already.
Let's any questions from your side you have to myself or the audience?
No, I'm fine. I'm happy that we had questions. I'm happy that we saw a lot of people. First people are starting to slowly leave. So I think it's about time. And I'm looking forward to talking to everybody next year and just come back. And next year we'll talk about 2023. And there's lots of other cool webinars in between and talks in between. And gladly just reach out. You'll find Henning and me on different social networks and locations. And you'll get emails about this anyway. Hence, you'll be able to reach us easily. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you also from my side for joining us today. Thank you, Ollie. It was a pleasure having you. I think that's my commitment for next year. I really like to do the moderation again.
Cool.
It was great having you today, and I think you could take something from it. So thanks a lot, everyone. Have a wonderful day. And if there's any question, just get in touch with us. We are Giant Swarm with the social media networks you will find us on.
Thank you. Bye.